Hi there, Richard the Dick Coughlin 616. How are you? And I'm back here with part 2 of my video, The Dick versus Peter Sprigg. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, I suggest you do so because it will give you the preamble to this, but I'll summarise it by simply saying I am going through and responding to a paper written by Peter Sprigg, who works for the Family Research Council in America, called 10 Myths About Homosexuality. Yesterday we finished on myth 3, and so let's pick it up there, shall we? Myth number 4. 10% of the population are gay. In the paper, Peter Sprigg says that in fact studies have shown that only 3% of people are homosexual. This is not a complete lie, however, it again is highly misrepresented. The idea that 10% of the population are gay actually comes from a study that was performed in 1947 called the Kinsey Report, which actually, among many other things, found some very interesting facts and figures regarding the people it surveyed. The two most relevant statistics it came up with were that 37% of men in America admitted to achieving orgasm whilst in contact with another man, and only 13% of women. Typical, eh? Tarts. The problem with Sprigg's survey and study that he shows that it's actually only 3% is not that it's not true, it's the fact that he's being very selective. The idea that 10% of the population are gay just comes from the fact that it's the easiest number to round up, because ultimately 10% of the people are not going to be gay everywhere you look. In fact, if you look at studies in state by state in America alone, you're going to realise that there are actually, depending on what state you're in, depends on what the percentage of gays are. For example, the highest percentage of homosexuals can be found, surprise, surprise, San Francisco, California, where it's 15.4%. In Orlando, Florida, it's 7.7%, whereas one of the lowest numbers is in Philadelphia, which is only 4.2%. I guess Tom Hanks must have killed all them off. So whilst the idea that 10% is a myth, it is kind of true that it probably is a myth, but it depends on what area you're in. And certainly, though, it's a lot closer than the 3% that Spriggs asserts. You've also got to take into account the fact that a lot of people who are surveyed might not completely be telling the truth. And now for a magic trick. I'm going to do myths 5, 6 and 9 in one go. Myth 5 states that homosexuals do not experience a higher level of mental or psychological disorders. Kind of weird claim to make, considering earlier on he pretty much claims that homosexuality is a mental disorder. It's kind of like saying that psychopaths do not experience a bigger level of mental disorders than non-psychopaths. Number 6 is that homosexual conduct is not harmful. Well, of course, that is true to an extent. It can be if you're using no lubrication and a sandpapered condom. And myth number 9 is that homosexuals are disadvantaged by discrimination. Because obviously, discriminating against homosexuals is a great advantage. There's no better advantage than to have people going around telling lies about you and not discriminating in any way. Fantastic. But let's deal with this in a more factual way, shall we? In the paper, Sprigg uses evidence from actually a pro-gay organisation to try and prove all of these claims to be true. Reading from 10 Myths About Homosexuals, even the Pro-Homosexual Gay and Lesbian Medical Association, the GLMA, which I thought was Gay and Lesbian Martial Arts, but there we go, acknowledges gay men use substance at a higher rate than general population, maybe because they're depressed all the time and want drugs, because they're fucking picked on by twats like you. Depression and anxiety appear to affect gay men at a higher rate, even though they don't suffer from more psychological disorders. Gay men have higher rates of alcohol dependence and abuse. They know how to party. That's why their parades are so much more fun. Gay men use tobacco at much higher rates than straight men. Problems with body image are common among gay men, and gay men are much more likely to experience an eating disorder. But again, they're not more likely to experience psychological disorders. The GLMA also confirms that lesbians use tobacco and smoking products more often than heterosexual women use them. They also eat more minge, probably have more pubes in their teeth too. Alcohol use is higher among lesbians, and lesbians may use illicit drugs more often than heterosexual women. Homosexual activists attempt to explain these problems as a result of homophobic discrimination. Fags. However, there is a serious problem with that theory. There is no empirical evidence that such psychological problems are greater in areas where disapproval of homosexuality is more intense. Maybe that's because they don't fucking care and they're homophobic bigots and they don't really give a shit about their psychological welfare. But the strange thing about this is the source that Sprigg cites, which is the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association, it actually says that homophobia is a reason for all of these conditions and disorders and health problems. I'm now going to read from you from the GLMA paper that Sprigg was citing and read to you the full thing that he was cherry-picking. Sprigg said, depression and anxiety affect gay men at a higher rate. What the GMLA fully said was depression and anxiety appear to affect gay men at a higher rate than in the general population. The likelihood of depression or anxiety may be greater, and the problem may be more severe for those men who remain in the closet or do not have adequate social support. Adolescents and young adults may be particularly high risk of suicide because of these concerns. Sprigg said, lesbians may use illicit drugs more often than heterosexual women. What the GMLA actually said was, research indicates that lesbians may use illicit drugs more often than heterosexual women. This may be due to added stresses in lesbian lives and discrimination. Lesbians need support from each other and from healthcare providers in order to find healthy releases, quality recreation, stress reduction and coping techniques. Mr. Sprigg, you are a Christian. Can I give you some advice? The 9th commandment is not an option. Myth number 7. Children raised by homosexuals are no different than those raised by heterosexuals. He claims, of course, that there is a greater high risk of depression and a greater high risk of suicide, and basically, if you're raised by queers, you're going to be fucked up. Again, he fails to admit the fact that there's a likelihood of kids being bullied or picked on, or being the result of homophobic arseholes who've been brainwashed by cunts like him. Nevertheless, this doesn't really matter, because again, it's complete bollocks. According to the American Psychological Association and the National Association of Social Workers, there is, and I gotta make this clear, there is no evidence that the sexual orientation of one's parents or adoptive parents interferes with that child's psychological well-being. None. None. Also, the American Academy of Pediatrics, dirty bastards, agree that children raised by gay, homosexual or lesbian couples function just as well cognitively, physically and psychologically and emotionally as children raised by heterosexuals. Number 8. Homosexuals are more likely, get this, to molest kids than heterosexuals. From a personal note, I've already addressed this idea that I find it bizarre that someone would like to separate heterosexual paedophilia from homosexual paedophilia. Because if I have 2 kids, 1 girl, 1 boy, I'd rather they both didn't get raped. I don't want the girl to get raped because that's child rape as God intended. Nevertheless, if I may go back to the facts on the matter, to our old friends and clearly Peter Sprigg's worst enemy, and that is of course the American Psychological Association, the National Association of Social Workers, the Child Welfare League of America, and the American Academy of Child Psychiatry. All of them, from study after study after study, have shown, by putting a gay in a room with a kid, presumably, saying, do you want to fuck him? Do you want to fuck him? Do you want to fuck him? No. Ask him 100 times. I don't know, I wasn't there for the test. I'm not a scientist. All of them say that homosexuality and paedophilia are not linked. Even though that's what, apparently, a lot of God botherers say. Maybe they know something we don't. And finally, myth number 10. Well, I say myth, they're right to assert that this is a myth. Homosexual relationships are just the same as heterosexual relationships. I don't need any research to cover this. I'm going to say, you're right. They're not. In fact, I could pick any heterosexual relationship and say that it's not the same as any other heterosexual relationship. Your relationship with whoever you have a relationship with, presumably, Peter Sprigg, you have a relationship with a broom handle that's got a picture of Beyonce's face stuck to it, or the corpse of your dead mother that you'd get out from under the floorboards and slow dance to every night whilst playing My First, My Last, My Everything sung by Barry White in your grandmother's knickers. None of our relationships with anybody are the same. Do you know why? Because human beings are different. We're all different. But that doesn't mean we can't all be treated the same. Because it's our differences that maybe separate us, but it's our understanding of those differences that unite us. And I'm glad we're different. And I'm glad that you're different from me. Because if I was the same as you, I'd hope I was a myth too. Richard the Dick Coughlin, 616. Good night. May God bless.
I would much prefer to import homosexuals into the United States. We believe that the United States is destructive to homosexuality in society.